Today on the Decarb Connect podcast, I'm very pleased to be joined by Patrick Childs, who is representing Mission Innovation, which is really a kind of a new model of collaboration between government and industry, bringing together, I know Patrick will correct me here, but dozens of international governments, all with this mission of sort of driving large-scale decarbonisation through both kind of the political agenda as well as investor and industrial agendas. Patrick, perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about you, but also how you've come to this point in time. What was your background and how have you come to this point of involvement around global climate policy?
Well, it's really good to be with you, and thanks for this possibility. So I'm a Deputy Director General working in the Research and Innovation Department in the European Commission in Brussels. I've been working in the EU institutions for about 25 years, and of those, the last 5 years or so, I've been working on research and innovation. Just before that, I was working on foreign policy and in our External Action Service. And those two things come together very nicely, I think, to sort of respond to what is, I think, for science and innovation, the major challenge of our times, which is the sort of climate change challenge and the existential threats of climate change. And I think I'm just very lucky to be involved in a number of different global coalitions, which in one way or another look at the science of climate change and how we can work together to address that. And Mission Innovation is a very big part of that.
From the Decarb Connect team perspective, the last sort of 12, 15 months has seen really quite a shift in how our kind of stakeholders talk to us. I know from your perspective, you must be seeing a lot of change in the last 12 to 18 months in terms of commitments and the focus on decarbonisation. Just as a starting point, what sort of patterns are you seeing emerge, and what is interesting you about this moment in time and some of the kind of momentum that we're seeing?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, of course, the European Union has been leading the global discussion on climate change for many, many years. And I think that we can be rightly sort of proud of our track record of being consistently in the front of the discussion on how internationally we need to work together to meet these threats. What's changed in our landscape in the last 18 months, of course, is the arrival of the Commission headed by President von der Leyen about 18 months ago, with the single headline objective of delivering on the European Green Deal, of making Europe the first carbon neutral continent by 2050, and a whole raft of initiatives and legislation and other things which I'm sure we'll talk about to support that agenda. And I think that we've seen also in recent months a number of global partners and important key players also signing up to net zero commitments in one form or another. And most recently, of course, the extremely welcome return of the United States government to the table with the new Biden-Harris administration and the very, very clear agenda that President Biden has set out on climate change. And I think this is reflected then also in the conversations that we have with our member states, but also with the industrial and science communities across the European Union. And I think the biggest change that I've seen in the discussion we're having with industrialists is that, in some of the hard to abate sectors, things like heavy industry, chemicals, concrete, as well as sort of long distance transport, aviation, shipping, that we are now having really serious conversations with our industrial partners about how they can make their own contribution to net zero. And that the sort of discussion we used to have, particularly with some of the big energy companies a few years ago, where they were going through the motions a bit of saying, yeah, climate change is important, but we have our business model. Now I think they've understood that climate change is in the center of their business model and is something that really is going to define business strategies as well as government policy for many years to come.
Yes, definitely similar to what we're hearing. I think if we and people like us who are, obviously our role is the bringing together of networks and the introductions that can help foster those collaborations and projects and move things forward in that way. What we hear, I would say, is a difference from a year ago where people were talking about how are we ever going to get it done? And it was all about the technology. Now, I'm not suggesting that the technology issue has gone away, but interestingly, now it is much more about the business model. And we're hearing more and more people talk about the business model for decarbonisation versus the challenges of simply the technology. What is it that the mission innovation countries, those that are engaged with that coalition, what are they doing? What have they done to drive the beginnings of systemic change?
Well, perhaps a few words of context about Mission Innovation. Mission Innovation is a global coalition of now 25 countries in the European Commission representing the European Union, which came together around the Paris Agreement 5 years ago with a single-minded goal of achieving a doubling of publicly funded investment into clean energy solutions, in particular the research and innovation dimension of clean energy over that 5-year period. And the good news is, I think that we're largely speaking on track to achieve that. That there has been an annual uplift of something like $4.9 billion a year in additional publicly funded research into clean energy coming from the Mission Innovation community of nations. And I think that sends a very, very clear signal and sense of direction about how public authorities see the future clean energy challenges. Of course, we recognize that the scale of those challenges, however, dwarfs anything that the public sector can provide. And the real solutions to climate change are going to require massive systemic investment, also at the level of companies and business, as companies embrace the economic opportunities that the climate challenge presents to us. And I think that the other good news of the last few years is that we can see from the figures, particularly in Europe, that we've managed to make significant reductions in global emissions and at the same time achieve significant economic growth. And I think that sort of counterintuitive but very encouraging result underlines the message that working on clean energy solutions can provide new business opportunities. And you just have to look at the success, for example, of the wind energy sector in Europe and the massive export opportunities that the sector is exploiting to see just how well positioned some European sectors are in these high-tech clean energy areas in order to sort of penetrate global markets at a time of very, very rapidly rising demand. So, I mean, that's the basic package for Mission Innovation. Now, what have we been doing more specifically? Well, a lot of the work has been sort of structured around 7 or 8 what we call innovation challenges, main thematic areas. So we've got one on hydrogen, we've got one on smart grids, we've got one on materials that are required for energy production. We've got things going also on the power sector, heating and cooling in buildings, gathering energy from sunlight directly. I mean, a whole range of different thematic topics where we have put together, under the leadership of one or a group of countries committed to mission innovation, a sort of mixed coalition of actors from government, from research and innovation organizations, universities, but also open to the involvement also of the private sector. And through these sort of key thematic work streams, we've managed to deliver a really significant uplift in the jointly managed, jointly funded research programs and projects than was happening before. And that for me is really the litmus test of the success of Mission Innovation. It's not just another international organization where people get together and talk about what they're doing nationally and congratulate themselves on those successes that they're making. Important though those information exchanges are, through Mission Innovation, what we're also doing is getting people around the table to do stuff together, to spend money jointly on common projects, to identify priorities that we share in order to make progress. And I think that as we think now for the future of Mission Innovation, that's the sort of pragmatic, can-do, results-oriented culture of Mission Innovation, which is going to be very important in the years ahead.
If you gave an example of a work stream, how does Mission Innovation drive that? Because as you quite rightly say, there are many organizations, coalitions, groups that get together to talk about this. So what is the difference in sort of practical terms about how something at a government level kind of has that influence through its work streams? Is there an example you could point to?
I just give you one example because it's on my agenda this week, and that is that we've been working with the Indian government and with the World Economic Forum in Davos to launch a global cooling prize. So it's a $1 million prize for different companies, researchers to come forward with a proposal of how to make a significant difference to cooling of buildings, which is one of the most energy intensive activities that we've got, using clean energy solutions. And I'm going to be participating in the coming days in the sort of award ceremony for this event, which is why it's on my mind at the moment. But I think it's a really good example of how different actors, so under the sort of umbrella sort of leadership of Mission Innovation, with the input of the Indian government on an area which, of course, is of a high priority in terms of the domestic Indian energy strategy as well, and then with the backing also of the industrial and business input that comes from the World Economic Forum, really working together to provide this prize money to organize the thing. Now, it's a small example, but it's one I think which is quite visible and gives you a sense of how what we're doing in Mission Innovation is different from, for example, what happens in the International Energy Agency in Paris, which does very, very important work, or the Renewables Agency, which is based in Bonn and in Abu Dhabi. But we work in close partnership with those organizations, but we try and add that additional level of operational delivery of real-time coordination and cooperation.
So real kind of practical example of a spur to action, not just a discussion about a possible course of action. I think that's a great example. Okay, so a slight change in tack, because as I said a few minutes ago, whilst in my team, we have been hearing this kind of shift in the conversation from issues around technology to talking more about business model, it is still true to say, I think that a lot of industrials in particular, one of the reasons that they're not sort of moving forward or haven't moved forward as much is this sort of, whether it's a fear or a kind of barrier, I don't know how you want to describe it, that the technologies around decarbonisation are not yet at scale.
You're right that, the challenges that we face, probably have three dimensions. There is first, are the necessary technologies, and specifically in Mission Innovation, clean energy technologies, but more generally, when we're talking about the European Green Deal, the wider decarbonisation agenda technologies, do we have technologies that we need to achieve the full decarbonisation objectives that we have? Answer is probably not. And we still have important work to be doing in finding quickly the new technologies which are going to be part of the next generation of decarbonisation solutions. So, for example, in the last 6 months, one thing that the European Commission has done is to launch a really big 1 billion Green Deal call of research funding over the sort of 10 main themes of the European Green Deal. And that closed with an extremely encouraging response, more than 1,000 excellent proposals at the beginning of this year. So we're really trying to sort of give a kickstart to the research agenda. But then you're right as well. There is a lot of opportunity for the scaling up and sort of commercialization of technologies which exist today. So hydrogen there, I think for me is a very, very good example. A lot of international discussion about hydrogen, key theme of work in Mission Innovation. But the real problem about clean, green hydrogen is it costs considerably more than hydrogen produced using fossil fuels, which in turn costs more than the other energy sources from fossil fuels that we could think about. So, what we urgently need to do is find the sort of business models and sort of new opportunities to scale up and de-risk and reduce what Bill Gates, in his recent book about how to avoid a climate emergency, Bill Gates has called the green premium, of using clean alternative technologies rather than the sort of traditional fossil-based solutions. And the third thing that we need to do, and there, the responsibility is very much with public authorities and governments, is to provide the right regulatory framework, the right sort of legislative environment for green technologies to emerge strongly and as quickly as possible. And there, I think, things like our Fit for 55 agenda, the Commission's sort of next milestone in the implementation of the European Green Deal, where we've established a sort of intermediate target of 55% reduction in emissions by 2030, that then during the course of this year, we're going to be coming forward with a really quite sort of extensive legislative package to support the efforts that member states and the business community in Europe are making in order to align themselves on the Green Deal objectives in a whole range of areas, from sort of energy efficiency to the sort of extra costs of clean technologies.
Does Fit for 55 sort of speak to the business models? Is the EU going to be able to help kind of spur almost the business model around either the procurement of low carbon or zero carbon materials, or is it more still focused on the technology and the technology readiness aspect of the challenge?
The Fit for 55 is mostly about creating the right regulatory environment for clean and decarbonizing technologies to emerge in a fair and and we hope swift way. So, I mean, of course, the shape of that legislation will have implications for business models of leading companies, leading industries in the European Union. We hope will support them and facilitate the progress that they are also committed to making towards those objectives. But it's mainly a sort of regulatory package, which is, of course, one of the things that the European Union is there to do, to set legislation, regulation for the European Union as a whole, or at least propose it, so that then our member states and the European Parliament can pick it up and come to agreement.
Back to your mission innovation hat. So the EU is obviously one constituent of mission innovation. How has that group of countries, or the way that works, how has that adapted over time? Because I'm sure, like, any coalition of partners, what happens on day one is not what happens at day, year 5 or whatever. How has that matured over time, and what are some of the differences you're seeing in how the coalition is working together?
Mission Innovation has existed since the Paris COP in 2015, so it's a relatively recent, a relatively new organization. And I would say that the thing that has most sort of characterized its sort of development over the last 5 years has been the growing number of countries which have wanted to join. So year on year, we've seen new members joining. I think most recently Morocco, but before that Austria, and the European Union and the European Commission was not a member on the first day, but we joined a few months after it was set up. So I mean, I think that the powerful attraction of mission innovation as the natural sort of central catalyst of international collaboration around clean energy research and innovation has had a very sort of attractive and mobilizing effect on countries around the world. But we're now at a point where we're coming to the end of our first 5-year mandate and thinking about what comes next. What's the next phase of mission innovation, and how do we want to reshape our membership criteria, our commitments together, and the ways that we work in order to, we hope, achieve an even higher level of ambition for the years ahead, given the scale of the challenges that we face. So we are trying to build on what we've achieved so far in terms of having a really focused agenda of priorities. And so that I hope that when our mission innovation ministers meet together under the sort of chairmanship, we hope, of course, physically present, but under the chairmanship of the Chilean government at the end of May, beginning of June, that we will be able to sort of come to a really strong agreement about what we call Mission Innovation 2.0, the next phase of mission innovation, looks like, in terms of the commitments that we make to continue to make progress domestically with our national research programs, the commitments that we make to be part of some of the sort of priority work streams. So we've been talking about things like hydrogen, like the power sector, like long-distance shipping as possible topics that we would sort of want to push for the future. And also a sort of collective commitment to making a success of mission innovation. I mean, we want to have active members, countries that are really going to, want to be part of it, bring resources to the supporting structures, mobilize their ministers to participate in events, and to make domestic commitments, which then will help us collectively to take this all forward. And the other very important dimension that I hope will emerge from Mission Innovation 2.0 is the way that we work with the private sector. That this has been a big focus of our collaboration so far. We've got partnerships with the, as I've said, with the World Economic Forum, with the Davos community. We have other important relationships, for example, with the Breakthrough Energy Coalition led by Bill Gates and the Gates Ventures people. But this is an area where we still haven't, I think, found the sweet spot of how do policymakers and companies, industrialists, investors work together on a common agenda and really do things that are meaningful together. And so I think that's going to be an important challenge for us also for the next period.
You mentioned at the start that Mission Innovation, or rather the constituents of Mission Innovation, have increased public investment by, I think you said $4.9 billion. That is a big stride forward in anyone's measure. But the commercial investor market also needs to step in.
Well, in the end, of course, investment needs to make a profit. And so what will drive the large-scale investment that we need is that companies, investors, see that the economic and commercial opportunities of those investments are going to give them good returns, as well as sort of sharing in the broader sort of societal benefits of making progress on climate. And for that to happen, we need to work together with industry to find sort of successful models of collaboration in order to de-risk the investments that are needed now for the sort of demonstration scale or scaling up operation for the emerging technologies that we're working on together, so that we are in a way preparing our industrial community to be really well placed to seize these new opportunities as they come forward. But as I said, I mean, I think that the speed with which we've seen the transformation in the wind energy sector and the strength that has brought to the European economy in particular, as now countries around the globe are sort of scaling up wind energy as quickly as they can, has happened much more quickly than anyone expected. And what I would like to see is that by working through policies like the European Green Deal, international collaboration sort of mechanisms like Mission Innovation, that we're able to have that sort of speed of transformational process also affecting other sectors. I mean, whether it's in hydrogen, whether it's clean aviation fuels, whether it's direct air capture, or other things for which we don't yet have commercially attractive or commercially viable solutions available at scale. That's where we need to work together to invest to create the economic opportunities for the future, and therefore the progress that we need on climate.
On that Fit for 55 agenda, that's a kind of a midterm measurement point, isn't it? Which is a reduction of emissions by 55% by 2030. Out of interest, is there something more short term than that you're going to measure success on as well? As in, is there something in the next sort of 3 or 4 years that you'd be like, right, if I see X, Y, Z happening, I know that Mission Innovation is on track, or that we are on track to achieve that? Are there any short-term measures?
Well, Alex, I mean, 2030 is tomorrow. I mean, in terms of the sort of pace at which we are able to embrace and integrate large-scale decarbonization strategies in major industrial sectors, I mean, 2030 is just around the corner. So, I mean, just to complete, what we're doing under the Fit for 55 package, I mean, we're thinking about improvements in our emissions trading scheme. I mean, already I think that Europe has set the sort of global standard in terms of successful emissions trading schemes. and now with our new innovation fund, we are able to generate very significant financial volumes to invest in some of these sort of clean energy technologies and decarbonisation strategies using money we're getting from the emission trading schemes. But we need to think about whether we can apply it in other new hard sectors like maritime, aviation, road transport and buildings. We're working on something called the effort sharing regulation, which looks at how we distribute the challenges of sharing out the burden of adjustment across different sectors and different member states. And that's something we've already been working on through the Just Transition Mechanism, which is a financial package to help some of the countries in the European Union which are facing the biggest challenges in making progress with decarbonisation. We're also looking at things like land use and forestry, the CO2 emissions from cars and vans, renewable energy and energy efficiency. So those are the sort of elements of the Fit for 55 package. And as I say, it's the challenges now. In terms of our immediate sort of success criteria, though, I mean, we are just at this moment in the transition phase for the introduction of our new research and innovation framework program in Europe, Horizon Europe, which has started at the beginning of 2021. And as part of that, we are setting up some new industrial partnerships in a number of key areas, building on what we've done in the past in programs like Horizon 2020. So just to give a few examples of that, we have a clean hydrogen partnership in preparation. We have a clean aviation partnership in preparation. We're working also with the rail sector. We're looking at how we work, sort of cooperate at a European level on air traffic control in order to reduce emissions from aviation. And we hope, of course, the aviation system will be able to return to some form of normality in the coming months. And so, how we progress with these new Horizon Europe industrial partnerships, I think is going to be really quite critical. And all the signals that we're getting are that industry in Europe and beyond are really very, very interested in these new partnerships and are bringing not only their people to the table, but also their money into the structures that we're developing for joint projects and collaborations in these key sectors. And so I think that already will give us a sort of an important sort of litmus test of the sort of progress that we're making. And for the moment, the signals are good.
And just out of interest, I know that you've got your the next phase of Mission Innovation launches in June. Is there a sense? Do you think there's a kind of growth in membership likely in the next few years as well? I know you've said up until now there's been a regular addition of members each year. Right? Is that on the cards that this will become an ever larger coalition?
Well, as I said before, the initial entry ticket for Mission Innovation was countries that were able to commit themselves to doubling their publicly funded research into clean energy research and innovation. And not all countries in the world were able to make that commitment. So we had a number of countries that were quite interested to join, but were not able to do so because of that rather challenging entry ticket. Now, for the next phase of Mission Innovation, although I would love to see countries around the world being capable of further doubling effort, obviously this is an exponential story and not something which can be sort of easily guaranteed. So I think that one of the things that we're thinking about as we shift our focus away from the sort of mechanical inputs of how much money you're spending to, well, what is the results of that spending and what are the affordable clean energy technologies that we're developing, which can then bring benefits not only to our own countries but globally, that it will be possible for new members to commit themselves, sign up. And I, for one, would certainly like to see a progressive increase in the Mission Innovation community, but on the condition that the new members bring their active commitment and participation. I mean, the Mission Innovation, has got too much of an agenda, is sort of too much in a hurry for us to be able to afford to have countries which are just passengers who just want to be there to come to occasional meetings. We need to have people who are really committed to the agenda.
Thank you for joining, and thank you for that, Patrick. I every time I talk to people, no matter what their kind of interest, whether it's governmental or private sector or whatever, it really strikes me that Obviously, this is not a linear process. Everything is gaining momentum, and an exponential growth and exponential change is not just possible, it's happening. So thank you for feeding into that nice positive worldview, because we could all use it at the moment. Thank you for joining.
Well, thank you, Alex. I enjoyed the conversation too. Have a good day.